Good morning. I'm your host, Claudia Shambaugh, welcoming you to the April 16, 2019 edition of Ask a Leader. Today, Shahir Masri will weigh in about the climate initiatives moving through Congress and about his next climate change awareness trek, this time up the western states. He'll bring copies of his book, Beyond Debate, Answers to 50 Misconceptions on Climate Change. He'll be bringing that to some of the new venues that he'll be visiting up the West. Then in the second segment, performer, teacher, and activist Dr. Derrell Acon will talk about his role in the Long Beach Opera world premiere, The Central Park 5, composed by Anthony Davis. Dr. Acon will, in addition, talk about Long Beach Opera's companion justice-themed lectures during the season. We'll be right back after a short station break. Thank you for staying tuned, everybody. My guest in this first segment is Shahir Masri, climate science researcher, activist, and author. Shahir has appeared many times on Ask a Leader. Briefly, I'll introduce him one more time. He is an environmental health scientist with a doctorate of science degree in environmental health from Harvard University, as well as Master of Science from Harvard, Bachelor of Science from UCLA in environmental science. He has given numerous talks on climate change and has been published in The Hill. He still does, and among other newspapers as well as scientific journals. He's an assistant specialist in air pollution exposure assessment and epidemiology at UCI. His recently released book entitled Beyond Debate, Answers to 50 Misconceptions on Climate Change focuses on addressing common misconceptions about climate. In it, he's a bit of a Renaissance guy covering chemistry, physics, biology, engineering, and politics. He joins me once again in studio. Welcome back, Shahir, to Ask a Leader.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you. So, breaking news. Well, that was last week when I was setting some of this up. Breaking news was the record high temperatures in Alaska. I mean, it's a deafening breaking news. I mean, people are thinking breaking news that's happening yesterday out of Paris, but that is another situation. But so let's talk about what you're processing when you get this new data about how high the temperatures have been there in Alaska.
Yeah, it seems like we're breaking news every month and every year.
Every week,
and it's always breaking in different places.
It's broken.
Yeah, it's broken. I mean, it wasn't too long ago that Alaska broke records. Just a year ago when we were in thawing conditions in the dead of winter up in the North Arctic Circle. So this is a trend that we're going to probably see moving forward. Record warmth in odd seasons, record cold during odd seasons. That's the kind of if there's any consistency with climate change, it's sort of inconsistency. So erratic weather changes from what we've seen growing up and what our parents and grandparents have experienced.
So we have a lot of initiatives, and I think there's a lot going on strategically and tactically with so many initiatives being introduced. And I want to be intellectually honest have you be that way in talking about what's the agenda and the interaction going on with these. So first, let's talk about what you think of what the Green New Deal is about, what it's trying to do as we talk about these others. We'll start with that one.
Sure, I get that question a lot. The Green New Deal, when you read through the Green New Deal, there's really nothing in it that strikes one as disappointing, from just a, pragmatic standpoint of where we'd like to be as a society. I mean, it's talking about reducing the income gap. It's talking about cleaning up the environment, both water and air. I mean, I think these are all things that we can all agree are good for society. I think where you get into a little bit of disagreement is there's this, some of the timeline, 12 years to get to 100% renewables, for instance. So, it's possible that that's pretty ambitious. I think that is unlikely to happen. I mean, if you just look at the history of where we are on this issue, I'd be very shocked if we were at 100% renewables in 12 years. And one might even argue that could be economically disruptive. So maybe some conflicting, some debate to be had about the timeline there. But in terms of the general thesis, I mean, that's exactly what we need to do. Is we need to set ambitious targets. We need to get to 100% renewables, or as close as we can. And I don't think we should, what's the expression, make the perfect the enemy of the good. Or, there's another expression, if you shoot for the stars, you'll land on the moon. And I think this is one example of that. It's ambitious.
Aspirations are absolutely
a
driver.
But it's also, I heard Bill McKibben say, it's the first proposal that is actually commensurate with the scale of the problem. And I think that's important to keep in mind.
Right. If you don't set that goal, if you don't aspire, then there's this kind of incrementalism that is putting us in reverse here. And I actually, after that Bill McKibben talk was here, he gave a couple of talks, and then what Citizens Climate Lobby brought together and those themes, I jumped on. I got this public service announcement. 12 years. We've got 12 years. And sort of to keep that in mind. So then Matt Gaetz, Panhandle Congress guy in Florida, comes forward with the Green Real Deal resolution. Let's talk about what he's doing with that.
Sure. And to follow up, one of the benefits of the Green New Deal is, again, it's bringing conversation around climate change in a meaningful way in the political sphere. So now, like you mentioned, we have a Republican from Florida who's now talking about climate change. And, for far too long, not enough has been said. So this is a good thing. At least we're talking about it. In terms of the Green Real Deal, as you just mentioned, again, he's a fan of doing something about climate change. At least he says so. He's not a fan of the carbon, dividend approach, which we can talk about later. He kind of has 4 platforms for his approach. So he's talking about increasing nuclear, retrofitting the energy grid. I don't have a big problem with those. Thing that I do have a bit of a problem with, or I'm at least suspicious about, is the opening of the public lands. And he's talking about opening these lands.
Fair and equal access to energy development on federal lands. That's right there in his resolution.
And it's pretty non-specific. Energy, energy.
To grab.
Right. So, you can sugarcoat this as calling it solar and wind is what we want it for. But who knows if all of a sudden we start seeing more coal exploitation, more oil, natural gas. So I'm a little suspicious about that part.
Well, we also, in preparation, we talked a little bit about he's leading with not the goals part, but what the kinds of projects with carbon storage and recapture.
Right. And that's something that I think we really need to keep in context. This is not a proven technology or proven approach to solving the climate issue, storing it underground. This is an academic exercise essentially at the moment, and there's really no way we can know that it's going to be seismically sound over hundreds of years. Let's say we store, a gigaton of carbon under the earth. Is that going to last 100 years, 500 years? What happens when we get earthquakes? We just don't know enough about that sort of methodology to really say that we can confidently store carbon dioxide underground.
Well, as I was raising with you, too, that there isn't a guarantee it's a net zero, net negative proposition with greenhouse gases.
Right. It's definitely not a guarantee. And this isn't just my opinion. I was interviewing a scientist at MIT in the fall who essentially called the carbon sequestration thing a big crock of you-know-what. So I really think that, and another sort of downfall of that approach is one could view this as enabling us to just continue the path forward.
Keep pulling out carbon.
Yeah, if we tell ourselves that we can just store carbon, then we're not really going to try as hard as we ought to prevent carbon from getting into the atmosphere in the first place. And that's really where we need to focus our efforts.
And there's also this lower regulations kind of thread throughout his approaches in there. And so it seems to be a very ideological versus I'm going to say it, as aspirational kind of, an urgency there.
Yeah,
in the climate. I don't feel like he's scared enough.
I think you're probably right. I mean, he does seem to be slipping in some of those political, one side of the aisle.
Dog whistles.
Yeah, and not allowing regulation, putting like a damper on the Clean Power Plan and other efforts. I mean, I think that there's definitely some things that are being slipped in that deal that are not necessarily in the best interest of the climate. And he talks down on the approach of a price on carbon emissions, saying that's going to send coal and oil and fossil fuel jobs overseas, and that's not good for the climate if we're just exporting these jobs. But that's really not how this carbon, a price on carbon would work. The whole idea is that the companies that are getting taxed are going to pass that tax on to the consumer. Consumer is going to start making more wise decisions about where they spend their money, and ultimately drive consumption towards fossil-free products in the marketplace. So he's sort of missing that piece, or disguising it. I'm not sure.
So you're sneaking in there the back door with the House Resolution 763, and we've talked a little bit about it with other guests on the show. It's the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act it's 2019 is when it was pushed out. So you mentioned that a little bit. So, it's an interesting situation to watch activists trying to coalesce around very different approaches in these different initiatives. So take up what you would like about the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, and how you, independently, you're not speaking for any particular movement, but the movement, but not a particular organization, how that can be compatible with the other initiative, especially, the Green New Deal.
Sure. So the Green New Deal, it fits right in there. The whole goal is to get to 100% renewables in 12 years. And if I recall, in the Green New Deal itself, I think it mentions putting a price on carbon. So to sort of explain what that would be, what that entails is we're proposing to put, by we, I'm saying the bill is proposing to put $15 price on a ton of carbon emissions. And that gets put on at the port, if you're importing fossil fuels, or if you're drilling for oil or natural gas, it'll be taxed at that area, and then that trickles down throughout the whole sort of product chain, eventually inflating some of the prices on the heavy carbon intensive products in the marketplace. If I'm going to buy, I like to use the example of very simple, an apple in the store. If there's two apples and one is shipped all the way from Boston or one is shipped from Washington, there's going to be, of course, different transportation distances associated with that. And the fossil fuel in shipping is going to be drive up and reflected in the price of the apple. So hopefully the cheaper apple will be the one that's grown closer by, all other things being equal, of course.
Right. Yeah, actually, I think about that when I'm consuming
huge carbon
wine,
footprint
like wine. Thank you, New Zealand, for bringing that over here. But I can't pick it up.
I can allay your worries, because some of the wine that's shipped on barter over the ocean actually has a pretty low carbon footprint. It's only when things are getting shipped over land or through air that you start to see a really high carbon footprint. So they're probably shipping it on a boat. Oh,
that's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's why you're here. For those of you who've just joined us, you're listening to Ask a Leader on KUCI 88.9 FM in Irvine, and streaming on the web. And you're following Shahir on his Instagram account right now. And Shahir is my guest, air quality researcher, author, and climate change activist, sorting out these climate legislative initiatives on the federal level. His book and his West Coast Climate Tour are what we're talking about too. That will finish up on that topic, that Beyond Debate Answers to 50 Misconceptions on Climate Change. And he just talked about a misconception I've had about the carbon load of shipping my Sauvignon Blanc from New Zealand to the West Coast. So let's go back to those initiatives then. But I'm watching the Citizens Climate Lobby folks. They're trying to reconcile the kind of, let's call it ambitious, the kind of sweeping language of the Green New Deal. And so let's say you are the consultant to them. What would you say would be taking the best of Green New Deal to keep coalescing with all supporters behind the climate change activism?
I think that one of the most important things to just drive home to people is, under this proposal, everybody actually gets a monthly dividend. And I think a lot of people don't realize that you are going to get a check in the mail every single month from the government on the order of, it could be up to, if you have a family of four, $200, $300 a month coming from the government. that's pretty exciting for the average day, the everyday person.
Well, yeah.
That's not a
Didn't
negligible
exist
amount of money.
before that.
Right. And I think that's going to be one of the things that really keeps people, on board with this. Up in Alaska, I don't think it's changed since I last looked at it. They get about $1,000. I forget if it's per year.
The petro revenue.
Yeah, from the fossil fuel industry up there, for slightly different reasons. But people up there are getting money, checks in the mail for the exploitation of fossil fuels in that area. It's time that every citizen gets check in the mail if companies want to continue what they're doing, and hopefully, again, with the trickle down effect of the higher prices for fossil fuel related commodities, hopefully people start to shift those to greener products. And the benefit there is, the more you shift to greener products, the less essentially of a carbon tax you're paying, because you're not buying those products that are taxed. And then your dividend actually is even more of a net profit. So it's really got a lot of great things in it. And I think we should all keep that in mind, that, the everyday person is going to get money from this bill.
So I'm wanting to see how you would try to bring the best out of these two different initiatives to sort of bring on as many people, because this urgency calls for any and everybody to sign on.
It's hard to, at this point, see bringing people on the other side of AOC's aisle onto the Green New Deal, just because it seems like it's been
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in case.
Right. It seems like she's kind of been a lightning rod lately, and the Green New Deal has also been a lightning rod lately. So it's hard for me to see the Green New Deal getting bipartisan support. So I'm not sure that in its current guise it's very feasible. I think we might have to go through. But again, this is something that gets the conversation going. We're already seeing conversation now on both sides of the aisle. So for me, it's not so much about how can we make the Green New Deal tenable for everybody, but possibly how can we get the conversation going and actually get a bill that we all agree on that's going to be good for everybody, and we can move the climate issue forward.
So there's going to be lobbying going on in June, and in the federal and state and local levels as well, that Citizen Climate Lobby is going to be putting together, among other entities. So, but you will be on the road starting May 6th. So let's talk about what you've learned from your continental tour and what you are going to do based on what you've learned there. I call it the Tour de Pacifique, but I don't know what do you have a name for your tour?
On the Road for Climate Action is the title we used in the fall and summer, and then that's also what we're using moving forward across the Pacific Northwest and on into Canada. Yeah, so we kick off on May 6th. Again, this is just a grassroots project. My fiance and I.
Please don't say just anymore.
Okay.
This is
a grassroots project. Important grassroots projects taking place all over the country. This is one of them, and we are going extending, what has already been 36 state tour to communicate climate change to the public, to the everyday person. We speak at colleges, high schools, junior high schools, church groups, citizens climate lobby groups, Rotary clubs. We go everywhere we can to talk about climate impacts, climate causes, and also importantly solutions. And we also hear from people. So we want to know as we travel the country.
You do not still.
Yeah, we
from
still.
the other one. Yeah.
Yeah, we still. We ask questions the whole time throughout and I take notes. What do people care about with respect to climate change? What kind of observations are people noticing? And those tend to change regionally. I've quantified a lot of what we observed on the first tour, and the science part of me is always trying to think of how we can quantify things and put it into a publication. And I actually have submitted a science paper quantifying, and we had a survey that we took along the way, which helps us do that. Submitted that, so hopefully we'll actually have a publication that really summarizes everything we've observed on that first tour. But on this second leg, we're going to continue asking questions. What kinds of solutions do people feel would be best? What kinds of concerns do they have? Maybe this can inform local politicians on where they put some tax dollars. And our website does a great job of bringing stories, and that's another important point. We think of climate change still in parts per million in these graphs that we see on TV, but we're increasingly seeing the story side of things. In the news there's always these record-breaking natural disasters. Scientists have been warning us about they're happening. So we try to video interview people, bring those stories to the public, not through the media or through the politicians, but just through the grassroots. And our website shows a lot of different videos. We've interviewed scientists, farm workers, one farmer telling us that they had 17 inches of rain in a single 24-hour period, washed away all the crops. These are the stories we're bringing to people through our website. And for those listening, roadforclimateaction.com is the website. We have a growing video archive. I've still got about 40 videos in my back pocket that I just have to find the time to edit and bring there. So far, there's probably about 10 or 15 online. But yeah, that's the nature of the new project. We're going to go from May to mid-June. And then during summer, I'll be giving talks locally. This past weekend, I gave a talk at a junior high school in San Juan Capistrano. Drove back down to give a talk in Tustin in the evening, and the next day, basically two talks again. Sunday as an Earth Day booth. So I'm trying to get out there as much as possible, talk to people about climate change. I think that's the kind of action we need to really see this issue get taken care of. People need to be talking about it, and they need to know what's happening.
How about some kernels of what took place? Something you learned from them, or something you noticed really caught on
the road
with the middle school kiddos and the other venues.
Oh, the middle school kids are always so fun to talk to, and they're some of the brightest bunches that we speak with. I mean, in one case in Connecticut, the kids knew all about greenhouse gas emissions and the whole fossil fuel issue. In terms of what I've learned from them, I learned that we can. Seeing these kids grow up, envisioning these people grow up, I have no doubt that our future is going to be in better hands than it is today. Learning about climate change from sixth grade and having real discussions about it, learning the science behind it, so that we're sending people off into into society with a background about this issue that isn't coming from different again, politicians or blogs or media outlets that aren't being truthful. I think that that's just really reassuring, and the more that we can get the science of climate change into the curriculum of the youth, the better off we're going to be down the road. I mean, more science is never a bad thing. We need to understand how our world works, and also talk about solutions, and that's kind of one of the things I try to bring to the students.
Yeah.
There are solutions, and they're probably just hearing the science, but I kind of got to bring a bit about that. There's great youth movements happening right now to address climate change.
So Shahir, using the analogy of a jigsaw puzzle, so the demographic, let's say a more mature demographic that you have talks with versus like the middle school demographic, who's put down more pieces of the puzzle? What does it look like? Who's putting the edges down?
I sort of talk to a bimodal distribution of people. A lot of retired folks.
Oh, much retired and
then a lot of really
youthful.
young people.
Yeah.
So I need to get those working age people into my climate conversations. But it's difficult. You tend to see, if you're talking to a school where they're sort of forced to sit there and attend class, or you're talking to adults, most of which are retired. They have the spare time to be there. Not a lot of other distractions in their life. So on this next Road for Action tour, I'm still trying to figure out, how can I get more people my age and in their 40s and 50s into the audience? Because voting is an important, way to get climate issues moving forward. And there's a huge voting demographic that I think we still need to bring into the climate conversation. Many people my own age.
So you'll bring that up on the West Coast tour,
yes.
The voting.
Yes.
What do you say?
I always say, I don't advocate for voting Republican or for voting Democrat. I advocate for voting for the Earth, for voting for the planet, voting for the climate. This is an issue that is an umbrella issue for all the other top national issues, such as national security, immigration, the economy. These are all housed under climate change. They'll all be affected by climate change. There's no disentangling these issues. So if you care about all these issues, then you do care about climate change, whether or not it's on your radar. So I think that that's just a message I drive home is, pay attention to candidates who, for one thing, recognize that we have a climate problem and that it's caused by humans, and subsequently that they have a plan to address it. And that's important. Nobody should be going to Washington if they don't have a plan to address climate change.
So here it seems like, just speaking from experience of the new congressional delegation in Orange County, that there is a way to talk about the power of voting to bring legislative action. That just it looks like it's there's just more activation with this legislative delegation in Orange County, and that there's a way to talk about, yes, be an engaged voter, and yes, you may get a more engaged legislator.
Sure. I mean, so you brought up the case of Orange County. We had just, only months ago, a county that was comprised mostly of local politicians who didn't care about climate change, one of whom outright denied climate change and thought it was just, basically a fantasy. It was only through grassroots efforts, through voting, through people getting really fed up and active at the voting booth, that we now have an entirely different Congress composed of people who are endorsing these new climate initiatives moving forward, and who are really having an active conversation and trying to get climate policy on the table. So it's incredibly important to see that it was voters and everyday people who decided they want to have a voice, who are now changing potentially the face of climate policy in the United States, which trickles into the world.
So in wrapping up, tell us that you'll be leaving on May 6th, and you will be bringing your book along. You got lots of copies with you.
That's true.
And so I was just bringing up that delegation now as a way of following, giving the example of what it looks. What's the payoff? What's the dividend for? Not the carbon dividend, the legislative dividend for engagement. And so I don't know if that is going to be something that can be a sort of proof in the pudding there for you. So we've got Shahir Masri. He's on his way May 6th, taking his book Beyond Debate, Answers to 50 Misconceptions, continuing to connect with new audiences. And Shahir, I really thank you for being on Ask a Leader today.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Shahir Masri, as I was saying, is my guest, and he is the climate researcher and activist on the road May 6th. Thanks for staying tuned. We'll be right back after a station break with Derrell Acon talking about Grand Central 5, an opera whose world premiere will be this June in Long Beach Opera Association. Welcome back to the show. This is Ask a Leader. 30 years ago this month, 5 African American and Latino American teenager, they were arrested for an assault and rape of a jogger in Central Park. Anthony Davis has composed an opera about this saga. My next guest in this segment is Dr. Derrell Acon, bass baritone, performing in the role of one of those wrongly accused, Antron McCray. Derrell Acon's recent repertoire includes roles in Don Giovanni, Barbara of Seville, The Magic Flute, Aida, Carmen, and Fidelio. An advocate for the American opera of the 20th and 21st centuries, Derrell Acon's performed in the Christopher's Opera Champion, the role of Martin Luther King Jr. in Philip Glass's Appomattox, Porgy and Bess, and making his debuts in Germany and Tel Aviv and in all over the world, and as well as a principal male dancer. He's earned awards in the NATS Artist Awards Competition, the Nicholas Lauren Competition, the Harlem Opera Theater Competition, Trout Museum in Appleton, Wisconsin, Chicago's Bel Canto Foundation Opera Contest, and the Neil Silva Young Artist Competition. Derrell Acon completed his Bachelor of Music degree in Vocal Performance and a Bachelor of Arts degree in Government with a minor in Ethnic Studies at Lawrence University and Conservatory Music. He earned his master's degree of music and doctor of musical arts degree in voice from the University of Cincinnati College Conservatory Music. A Fulbright scholar to Italy, Derrell Acon is a frequent presenter at venues, conferences, bringing his scholarship on Blacktivism and the power of performative education. As project director for Long Beach Opera's Community Conversations Initiative, Dr. Acon is using his work in activism and education to promote and facilitate discussions about race, equity, and justice throughout the Long Beach and Los Angeles areas. I think it was Conversations number 1, and I'll attest to how intentional and how really revelatory it is. He is coming to us today from Chicago. He'll be back later, but he's coming to us today from Chicago, here to talk about his performance coming in Southern California this June. Welcome to Ask a Leader, Dr. Derrell Acon.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Kindly thanks. First, just to be as deferential as I can possibly be, I'd like to establish, Derrell, what is the best way of referring to these five gentlemen, the subjects of the opera, The Central Park Five?
I think it has become pretty standard to call them the Central Park Five or the Five. I guess another option would be to call them all by their first names. But since there are five of them, that may become a little difficult in conversation. To my knowledge, none of these gentlemen are offended by the terminology just saying the five or the Central Park Five, since it has become such a famous term around the case.
So this case, it can be broken down in several different sections, and when looking into this, I've been interested in what the members of this group have said about their life coming full circle. So this story has a huge arc. What parts of the story does the opera take up? Talk about the whole entire arc of the opera, please, Derrell.
Sure. Well, the opera begins with a prologue. It's a 3-act opera. It begins with a prologue. In the prologue, you hear the five talking about life in Harlem, talking about the world is ours, talking about, you hear different mentions of art, but also of the discrimination faced by members of the Harlem community and by extension, of course, the Black and Latino communities in America. And then once we get to the end of Act 1, we get the jogger case, and you hear, even in the orchestra, you hear the jogging happening, and then you hear the chorus talking about, this woman has been attacked and raped, and we're looking for the suspects, and then these five gentlemen are brought in, and Act 1 ends with them first feeling like, we're fine because we didn't do anything, so this is going to be fast. Even though they have been brought in by the police, this will be fast. We'll just tell them the truth, and then they'll release us. And then the longer they're at the police station, one of the last lines of Act 1 is something strange is happening. They are aware that a case is beginning to be built against them. Then when you get to Act 2, you get a little bit more insight into their lives, dealing with the police, dealing with the DA, and talking to their parents, not understanding really what's going on. Keep in mind, these are gentlemen who are between 14 and 16 years of age, so they don't have a lot of life experience or a lot of insight into how these types of things work. And so they talk to their parents. There's a lot of crying. And then finally, when we get to Act 3, a lot has happened. We've had, Donald Trump's characters comes in talking about these guys. The DA comes in talking about these guys. And the opera ends with the guys basically saying that, this is going to get better for us. And you, of course, in the immediacy of the opera, they're talking about the guys and they're going to get out of prison and it's all going to be okay. As we know, ultimately they are exonerated and even given a settlement, but there's still this sustained sense of pain and sense of discrimination and hurt that you can hear in their voices. And I think that speaks to larger society. And one of the last lines of Act 3 and of the opera is, when will it end? And for these guys, of course, this happens even after they're out of prison. They're still wondering, when will these types of situations for people who look like us and have similar experiences to us end?
So, Derrell, thank you for, in that arc, you're also explaining how there are a multitude then of roles, of characters that are performing. So the family members are represented in voice and among other people in the community and all over that you mentioned?
Yes, the mothers and fathers of the five some of them are taken out of the chorus. A lot of them are not considered principal roles, but they're secondary roles. And so, like, for example, an alto or a soprano may represent one, like Yusef's mother, or a tenor, I believe, represents my father. Antron's father. But then you have the five, and then you also have Donald Trump as a character, because if we all remember,
Yes.
he made some very disparaging comments against the five during the time. We also have an assistant DA character. And then the most fluid character, I would say, of the opera is a mass character who sort of takes on different roles. Sometimes he speaks as the community. Sometimes he speaks, I should be more specific. Sometimes he speaks as the black community. Sometimes he speaks as the police. Sometimes he speaks as what larger society thinks about these young men. And so you will see him in a lot of different interactions with both the five and with the assistant DA.
Is this the figure that I've seen that on the internet that he has both the white and the black sort of colored face? So
Yeah,
that's the
him.
character. Okay. Wow. That's amazing. Well, you'll be singing in the role, as we said, of Antron McCray, one of these five teenagers that were implicated in the rape assault. They were charged in April of 1989. Just a little background for folks. They were convicted in August of 1990 and eventually exonerated in December 2002. Tell us, Derrell, about your preparation, including whether you had a chance you could acquaint yourself with Antron, his family and his friends, and his legal team.
Sure. Well, I am still acquainting myself with Antron and his story, and trying to gauge as much as I can of what he carried into this moment in his life. You know, he was a young boy, really, a young teenager of 15 when this happened. And from what I can gather, he was very shy. He loved his mother. He lived with his mother and his stepfather in Harlem. That's where he was raised. And he was an athlete. You know, he was coached by his stepfather and was a pretty good student at a career academy in town. And so, you know, in many ways, just a regular teenager living in Harlem trying to make a life for himself until this happened. And it's very unfortunate to consider the type of personality you gather from Antron's history, because this is a shy guy who, you know, he has his group of friends, presumably as a form of protection. I remember growing up in, you know, not in Harlem, but in St. Louis. Oftentimes, I really was not very interested in anything that was happening in my neighborhood, but I still kept a group of friends around me just because I felt more protected. I felt more like I was a part of the story happening around me, and therefore was protected from any of the implications of what, you know, of the violence or of the crime or any of those things. I could decide how I wanted to operate within those circles. And I think Antron had a similar experience, just this shy guy trying to live life, trying to, you know, better himself and get out of it. And then this happens.
For those of you who've just joined us here on Ask a Leader, my guest is Dr. Derrell Acon, Long Beach Opera's Manager of Engagement in the Community Conversations Initiative Project. He's a bass baritone performing in the role of Antron McCray in Long Beach Opera's upcoming world premiere, The Central Park 5. And Anthony Davis is the composer, and the libretto is by Richard Wesley. So you've mentioned other characters. If media is the character, could you talk about how media is conveyed in this story's arc?
Sure. You know, I don't think that media, at least the way we understood it, media played, as I assume you're getting at, played a huge role during the time. And I will say we don't necessarily get a ton of that in the opera, because the opera is really focused on the five themselves and kind of their interpersonal interactions among each other, but also with the DA and with their family members. But we do get a little bit of what we got out of the media through the chorus or through the mass figure, but a lot of it comes in the form of just stereotypical statements you might hear, statements about the guys, statements about what happened in the case and this woman being abused and attacked. But you get it in the form of, like, we are outraged, more in that. And so it's kind of meant, I believe, to be more metaphorical as opposed to actual articles or actual newscasts that you would have heard during the time.
And to also follow some of the others, and Antron McCray, by the way, he's hard to find in the media, and now I guess that's the shyness coming through, that it's just hard to find out about him. There are others that are very outspoken and a motivational speaker. I think Mr. Youssef is. So, but back to the point of the media, that it was exploding at the time of this case breaking, but the exoneration, the outspoken members of the Central Park Five, that the media is just like it's a whiff of coverage about the exoneration, which it's another way they've been, victimized.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and that's one of the reasons you speak about Antron being hard to find. After this happened, he changed his name, and because he, even once he had been cleared of the conviction, there were still so many things held against him. There were still folks who believed that they did it. He tried to find work in the police department and prison system, believe it or not, and both denied his applications because of his conviction. And to this day, he's still struggling to find good, solid work. He's working as a forklift operator, I understand.
Okay.
But he only recently has been willing to come out, and it took him a while. For example, you probably know about Ava DuVernay's series coming out on Netflix. It took him a while to agree to that because he is a very shy person, and this had a huge, huge impact on his life. And to the point where he says, there's a quote from him saying that, he lost his religion because of this. As he said, crying. He said he doesn't believe in anything. He said, I'm by myself. Even now, I feel myself becoming emotional to think that this had on such a young person, who I assume had been very religious, if he were anything like your average black person living in Harlem during that time. But he said, I'm by myself because, as we hear in the opera, and I'm sure happened in real life, a lot of times these young teenagers were wondering, why is this happening to us? What have we done? And just seeing that arc of of course, the truth will prevail. We're going to, just tell the truth, guys, and we'll get out. And seeing that turn into wait a minute, something is against us. Something is being constructed against us. This is not going to work out the way it's supposed to work out. I think that plays a parallel for Antron with his faith. And that's just so tragic to me.
So I'm going to leap around in the order of some things I want to bring up, because I want to tack on tightly to that point. The fourth in your series of community conversations will be guilty until proven innocent, paired with the Central Park performance. And I just want to run by that we multiply Antron McCray's case by the multitude of other wrongfully convicted, and so there's it. I mean, we're breaking it down. It's the wrongfully convicted of capital crimes. Just that of itself, it's 3 to 5% of all convictions. So we're not getting into the other crimes where there could be wrongful arrests. We're not getting to the arrests themselves, which can set somebody on a totally can unravel somebody in terms of how they're able to keep a job and keep their family together and all that. Just an arrest by itself, not to mention the lingering effects of a conviction. So, but to think of 3 to 5% of capital crimes are wrongful convictions, that's hundreds of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of Antron McCrays that had their lives shuffled and their religion lost.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm happy you brought up the community conversations. Our next conversation is actually April 30th.
Correct.
And that's one that actually deals with formerly incarcerated individuals.
Yes.
And then this May 25th conversation on guilty until proven innocent, we actually have someone, Gary Tyler, who served 41 years in jail in Angola prison, which is said by many to be the harshest prison in our country.
In Louisiana.
Yeah, and he served 41 years before he was finally released for first-degree murder, and he's going to give that keynote speech. And that just goes to show you, I mean, this man, he is 60 years old right now, so more than half of his life was spent in prison. And so more than half of his life has been shaped by a system that is just so ill-formed and so ill-functioning. And to imagine that he is even able to give these types of speeches, and I haven't met him personally yet, but to my understanding, he still has such an optimistic sense
Yes.
Within, and how he speaks and his views on life. And I think that goes to show the power of the person, the power of the individual to overcome these types of atrocities, really. But the sad thing about it is we shouldn't have to be that strong, and because that's just not, we shouldn't have to be so strong till we have to overcome unfair strictures in society, because not everyone is confronted. It confronts those types of systems, and there are only certain members of our society that face those systems, and I think that is a testament to the inequity in our society. And I'm so happy to have the opportunity to facilitate these conversations around these topics. And I should say that I mentioned two of them, the April 30th and the May 25th conversation. And then our last conversation of 5 is June 6th, also during the run or during the rehearsal period of Century Park 5. And that's a conversation entitled Black Lives, the Art, and Mattering. And that's going to be a keynote speech by Anthony Davis, the composer for Century Park 5.
Yes.
And we're going to take a look into the future. How do we move forward? How can the arts be involved in telling these stories, in catalyzing these difficult topics? So all of these are very poignant topics, and I hope anyone who's available in the area is able to come and join us for them.
So I will be sure to include for listeners the link to the Long Beach Opera so you can see all of these conversations are located around Long Beach venues, so that it's not far away from our radio station here too. And so I guess to collapse a couple different points I wanted to otherwise make in a longer form was that preparation for, if somebody's still not aware of what happened with the Central Park 5 case, that the Long Beach Opera does offer a link to go and get more background. Will the gentlemen involved in this case, will any of them be taking in this performance, and where will this world premiere for this Long Beach Opera production be going on after June?
Sure. The answer to your first question is I think I'm not sure if any of the actual 5 will be in attendance. I've been in touch recently with Jasmine Harris of the California Innocence Project, and there may be a connection between us and one of the Central Park 5 at least, which could lead to who knows where. So I'm going to follow that, and hopefully we can more intimately involved with them in terms of what they know and the insight they're providing to our projects and to the opera. In response to your second point, I think first of all, the opera is going to take place at Warner Grand Theater for our run, and then after that, it just depends on the reception. As with any world premiere, you kind of have to do it first and see how people respond, and then a lot of times other producers will come along, other opera company administrators will come along to see the premiere and decide if it would work well in their respective houses. And so we're very optimistic about it because it's a great story, and it's a story that is very important and very timely for the events happening in our society today, a lot of which are identical to what was happening in 1989. In many ways, we've moved forward, but in many other ways, we haven't moved anywhere at all. So it's a sad truth, but it's important that we face them.
And it is an interesting time, and that maybe that there will be more opportunities for this production because of the movement in legislative arenas to deal with the mass incarceration and other aspects that, mass incarceration doesn't even get at the wrongful convictions, but I guess with new technologies and I think a sense of outrage that's bubbling up with greater intensity that the Central Park 5 kind of opera production can be seen and taken in and discussed in more places around beyond Long Beach, it seems. Well, thank you, Derrell, for taking this time today to be on Ask a Leader. I'm so appreciative of your being with us today.
My pleasure, Claudia. It really is. Thank you for having me, and thank you for holding this discussion. It's very important.
And I'm looking forward to meeting you again at the next one. I know I'll get to I'm hoping I get to the April 30th for sure. I want to get to the guilty until proven innocent one on the 25th. So good luck to you. I can't wait to hear and see you in the performing roles. And there's always more to the conversation. Thanks again, Derrell.
All right. You have a good one.
Thank you. You too. We're going to close with some Anthony Davis variations in Dream. And that was my wrap. Next week, I'll have on Ben Leffel, UCI PhD candidate in sociology and co-creator of the Center for Innovative Diplomacy Digital Archive. He'll be talking about his work with the ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability, an important international strategic alliance. Talk with you next week. Thank you for listening, everyone.